Hey, Dylan, Shanil, Amira, thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. I know we'll have students trickling in for a bit. Zoe, welcome. Chelsea, hi. Rodney, how are you? We're going to get started in just a minute. Hey, Amani. Nice to see everyone here. I'm just giving it an extra minute or so to let more students trickle in, and then we'll get going. All right, looks like it's kind of slowing down a bit. So we'll get started so we don't waste too much time. Welcome, everybody. A couple of announcements just before we get started. This program is being recorded. Eventually, we hope to host these on like our YouTube channel so that we can refer students to these conversations in the future, which would be very helpful for them. We will have a survey. I'll share the link a few times throughout. If you wouldn't mind maybe following that link or hanging on to it so you can give us some feedback. The first half of this program will be a conversation between Natalie and I, and the second half will be questions from you all. So I would encourage you really at any time to submit questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Just go ahead and click the Q&A, submit your question, and Jordan, who's working behind the scenes, will be screening those. And during the Q&A segment of the program, we'll invite you in to chat with Natalie. Think if there's anything else. I guess if you do come in to ask questions, please keep your camera off until you're in the room, and then I'll sort of welcome you and you can turn your camera on at that point and introduce yourself and go ahead with your question. So let's get started. Welcome to the next step. The next step is an OAE program highlighting the journeys of recent alumni. Our guests will reflect on their time at the University of Miami and how they've navigated life after graduation and what their current path looks like. The next step is part one-on-one interview and part Q&A with attendees. Today's guest is a very special guest, Natalie Marrero. Natalie was a Hammond Scholar at the University of Miami, who graduated in 2019 and is now in her third year of medical school at Johns Hopkins. She's interested in addressing health disparities that affect minority groups through the implementation of health education, community outreach programs, and she plans to work as a preventative cardiologist after medical school. Natalie, welcome back.
Thank you, Chris. This is great to be back. I'm really happy to be able to speak to the students.
It's awesome to see you again. I will say before our conversation goes further, just for those of you watching, there is a bit of a delay in our connection somewhere. So please forgive any awkward pauses or if Natalie or I trip over each other here and there. I'll do my best to quiet down and let Natalie do most of the talking. But let's get started. Natalie, tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of where you grew up and how you found yourself at the University of Miami and maybe how you made that college decision.
So I was originally from Miami, Florida, so I decided to stay home for college. However, I did have other options to go away, and I particularly remember I always wanted to go to medical school going into undergrad, and I wanted to major in science. And I remember visiting multiple different campuses, UM being one of them, and I visited, Hopkins and all these other schools. And really what made UM stick out to me was I remember it was like the small class sizes. I wanted a more intimate relationship with faculty members. And I didn't see that in a lot of other institutions. In a lot of other institutions, I noticed it was more, there was like a distance and a disconnect between the students and the faculty. And you couldn't form those relationships with the faculty. And I remember when I visited UM, faculty seemed very approachable The class sizes were smaller, and I felt that I could have a more intimate relationship with them. I would feel more comfortable approaching them if I didn't, understand something in a lecture versus at a bigger institution. The professor just seemed so intimidating. And so that really drew me to UM. The diversity of the student body really drew me to UM as well. In a lot of other institutions, I didn't see that diversity. I didn't see, it was a lot of other institutions, a majority of the students wanted to study science, or the majority of the students were like liberal arts. I think that UM had a very good mix of students with different passions and different interests, which allowed me to explore those different paths, and really reinforce, what it is that I'm passionate about and what other students are passionate about. So those were like the two major things that I felt UM was the right place for me, at least for undergraduate experience.
So I remember very clearly that medical school was always the plan for you. And in fact, I share that story often with current students because I would say as an advisor, one big message I want students to understand, especially early on, is that things don't always go as planned. And it's wise to sort of be open to change or discovering something new or finding a new pathway or realizing that pursuing your dreams and your goals is not always a connect the dots straight line. But your experience kind of was. It kind of was a very straightforward. So I know you never questioned whether you wanted to be a doctor, but how about what you chose to study? Did you ever go back and forth, or what did you major in, and how did you decide on that?
Yeah. So I did come in saying I wanted to go to medical school, and that was in large part. So there's no physicians in my family. So that passion of mine was driven a lot by the extracurricular activity that I did in high school. I volunteered at hospitals, and that's really where that passion was ignited in me. I came in majoring in biochemistry. I was only a biochemistry major. And because I was also a foot fellow, so I had a little bit of freedom in my schedule. And I did stick with the biochemistry major. And one of, the benefits of a biochemistry major is there really is not a lot of classes that are required for you to take. So you also get a little bit of leeway and flexibility in kind of pursuing other passions. And I initially I started taking like psychology classes, and I was really interested. I think that from a basic science perspective, you get a certain understanding of the body, but then there's the mental health component of the body and the psychosocial components and the social determinants that are equally as important. And I see it now in medicine. A lot of patients, the biology is the easiest part to solve. It's really these other kind of aspects that are difficult. And so because I had that flexibility in my schedule, I started taking psychology courses. And then I just decided to turn that into a major. And so I picked up that double major in psychology as a result. And I thought it was amazing. It's really a good balance, I think, that I was able to get from a basic science perspective and then from more of a psychosocial perspective, and ultimately give like a realistic view of humanity.
Okay.
So
So
yeah, I came in science, but I kind of went the other way.
how about outside the classroom? Talk a little bit about what you were involved in, which I remember was a lot. But also, if you could, maybe think of it in terms of like, what were you involved in for your own sort of interests and investments versus what were some of the things that you did deliberately to try to prepare yourself for medical school or to create the most competitive application for med school?
Yeah. So I would say from a med school perspective, and unfortunately or fortunately, there are certain things that you have to do. You have to be involved in research. And by research, I don't mean being in a lab and doing basic science research. I think that's a misconception that a lot of us go into school, into undergrad thinking. Research can be anything from focusing on a public health issue or more clinical research. It's really any academic, like scholarly activity. So you have to be involved in some sort of like what we call scholarly work. And you have to shadow just so that you know what you're kind of getting into, even though shadowing is not necessarily an accurate representation of what you're getting into, but at least you're getting a sense of, the different fields and what a physician does. And you have to do community service. because it's a career that is just revolves around serving. And so those are things that I think you have to do now. Where your passions and interests come in, I think can then help you determine what type of community service you want to do, what type of research you want to do, and what type of physicians you want to shadow. So you can still kind of tweak it to try to figure out what your passions are. So for my research, I started off basic science. And it goes back to, I think, the ability to connect with faculty. I was a biochemistry major, and so I was able to speak to one of my professors who was an active researcher, and he connected me to somebody that was conducting research at the Miller School of Medicine. And so that's where that, I was able to get that research done. But as I said, I discovered that I don't like basic science research. I still don't like basic science research. And so I then switched over, and I actually, through the Butler Center, was introduced to an eating disorders program in the local community that was conducting research. And so I transitioned when I was a senior, so pretty late in my time at to more clinical research. For community service, I volunteered a lot. There's a local children's hospital, Nicholas Children's Hospital. They're always open to all volunteers, and you're not sitting behind a nursing station doing paperwork. They have a lot of very engaging opportunities for students. There's a radio station in there. You can sit bedside with patients and play board games with them. That allows you to, one, see if you like what type of patient care you like, and also you are having an impact, and there's a lot of stories that are going to come out of it, and those are stories you can talk about in the future. And then through the Butler Center, they introduced me to the Austin Everett Foundation that actually works with and other local sports teams, pretty much honoring, they work with oncology patients and make them like honorary team captains for local sporting events. So that's kind of what I did to get into things that you have to do to get into med school. And then there's many extracurriculars and clubs at I always loved student government. I like the idea of creating and developing programs and designing what I call now interventions, but you can just think of them as like designing and implementing programs based on specific needs. And so I joined Freshman Leadership Council as a freshman, and then that kind of just opens the door for other opportunities as you kind of become a sophomore and then a junior. And so I think I was also on the campus liaison council for my sophomore and junior year. And then little by little, especially as like the psychology started, I started to pick up more on psychology. I really was fond of health education. And so the counseling center, you can become a mental health like peer educator, and you do a lot of we organize a lot of like activities. I know for Suicide Awareness Week, for like eating disorders, we did, I can't remember the name, but we have activities, Smash the Scale or something, it's called something like that. Throughout the year, you organize these events to raise awareness, and you're pretty much the advocate for and the student representative for the counseling center. So I did that. And then the last one activity that I did was at the Miller School of Medicine. There was like an adolescent HIV clinic. And I was able to work with them over a summer as an HIV community health kind of educator. And that was also at the Miller School of Medicine. So there's things you have to do to get into med school. But what I always like encourage people to do is honestly just follow your passions. Don't think of it as things you have to do, because if there's one thing I think that stands out in interviews and just moving forward, it's your passion for something. They can tell when you're not really interested in your research, you're not really interested in the service activity that you're doing, versus somebody that maybe it's not such a innovative or unique kind of research project, but it's something they're passionate about. That really does come across, and it also makes it you look forward to doing it instead of it kind of dragging on and you viewing it as something you have to do for med school. So don't listen to what everyone else is doing, and just kind of figure out what you're passionate about and stick to that.
Natalie, remind me, were you a commuter student or did you live on campus?
I was a commuter.
Okay, now I just want to sort of put that out there, because I feel like for commuter students, it's a little bit more of an obstacle or a challenge to feel as connected and involved. When you live someplace, it's easy to go to late night, student organization meetings and things like that. But as a commuter, sometimes it feels like you have to make that extra step. So I just want to highlight how much you participated in, while also being a commuter student. I think that says a lot about your focus and probably time management too, would you say?
Yes. Time management is key when you're an undergrad and in the future too, in general.
Yeah, so that's a good point, Natalie. My next question is about your transition to medical school. So if you could maybe shed a little light on what that experience was like in your first year of med school, and maybe as best as you can, compare it to what it was like transitioning to college out of high school.
Um, so I think the biggest change, so I was a commuter, as Chris mentioned, and so I think a big change for me was when I started med school, I was moving to a completely different state. Um, and that was the first time that I was kind of living away. So that was just took some getting used to. And then versus, so in both regards, when I started at from high school, I didn't, I thought that high school prepared me well academically. Was challenging. Nobody finds orgo easy. Nobody finds physics easy. So it was still challenging. But I felt that, again, I like lived in office hours. So if you're going to office hours, don't feel ashamed. I lived in office hours. Just the ability to like seek out that help. I thought that I was able to get used to like academically. And I was also very involved in high school. And so I think that's what drew me to wanting to be involved at So I didn't think it was a particularly, I think the workload was definitely different going into college, and the more flexibility in your schedule where you're not in class from, 7 a.m. to 3, and you kind of create your own schedule. So that just took some getting used to. And like I said, time management and planning. In terms of transitioning to med school, to be quite honest, it was intimidating and scary. Thinking of the vast amount of information they will throw at you in 1 week, what you learn in like a semester in like undergrad. At least that's what it felt like. But I was very pleasantly surprised at, I think, my preparation coming from and like my science background was actually very strong compared like to my classmates. And my classmates come from all over, everywhere from like we actually have a lot from UF, but you also have like Harvard and Stanford. So we really do have a good mix here of different backgrounds, which I love. But I was always kind of at the same academic level and understanding as my classmates. So I thought that did actually a really good job in preparing me, and the ability to manage my time was also really a skill that I gained at because of the flexibility and the needs to manage your time, that also then helped me in med school. Because in med school, they're not going to be reminding you that you need to be studying and like doing these things on a day-to-day basis. You just have an exam in a month on like a semester's worth of material. And so you really do have a lot of independence, and you have to kind of manage the time. So those are, I think, skills that I gained as an undergrad that then allowed me to succeed in med school as well.
That's great. Just 2 quick PSAs for our audience there. I know that the connection's not so great here and there. I mean, Natalie, I'm getting almost everything you're saying, but I think some people listening might miss something. If anyone is missing a piece from what Natalie just said, go ahead and drop it in the chat, and maybe we can just kind of repeat that, especially if it's something that you felt was important or you were eager to hear but missed it. Aside from that, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen to submit your questions. I have a few quick hitting questions for Natalie, just so you all can get to know her a little bit better. And then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience if there are any. If you'd like to hear me keep asking questions, we can arrange that, but it'd be much more fun for you all to come in to the webinar and chat with Natalie yourselves. So with that, Natalie, I have a few, let me quickly also say, I, on purpose, skipped a lot of the Mcat and other med school preparation questions, because I know those are the things that are sort of most pressing for our current students. So keep that in mind. Natalie, a few quick hitting questions for you, just so we get to know you a little bit better, and then we'll turn it over to students. So let's start with film. What's your favorite movie?
Oh, I'm a Twilight girl. I was actually obsessed with the Twilight films, the whole series.
Okay,
I was there when it opened. Yeah, so definitely Twilight.
okay. And how about cuisine? What's your favorite food?
Italian. Oh, easily pizza, pasta, anything Italian.
All the good stuff. What's your favorite trip you've ever taken?
I would say I went to Mont Tremblant in Canada. It's in Quebec, and I went to a ski resort. So definitely skiing in Mont Tremblant.
Cool. What is the best decade of music, in your opinion?
2000s.
And of all the things you've accomplished, what are you most
Specifically
proud of?
hip hop,
Specifically hip hop?
specifically hip hop R&B. Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad you added that in there. We needed a little more detail. What are you most proud of?
Um, I would say stepping out of my comfort zone. So I think Chris knows this about me, but I was always very family oriented, and this move was scary for me, moving to a different state. So I think the most growth and the best experiences of my life have come from stepping out of my comfort zone, and kind of facing fears head on. So,
And is there anything that you would do differently if you had the chance?
I would have probably got studied abroad. I say study abroad. That's something I don't want to say regret, but considered study abroad. When undergrad, I was not as flexible as I wish I would have been, in terms of kind of exploring. Now I'm actually much more flexible, but I would have maybe studied abroad in undergrad and explored a little bit more.
That's interesting to hear. It's sometimes tough, I think, for pre-med students who don't want to take gap year to figure out how to fit that in to the undergrad curriculum. So maybe we'll be able to talk more about that when the students come in. My last
I
question.
do want to say something quickly about gap years. Um,
Go ahead.
So I did not take a gap year, but when I was interviewing and even now in med school, I am all for gap years. Majority of my classmates took gap years. They have amazing like experiences from their gap years. So definitely happy to talk more about that. But some of the most amazing projects, and experiences have come out of gap years.
Do you have any examples, Natalie? Because gap years are a great topic and it's something that comes up a lot in our conversations with students.
A lot of my classmates did a lot of like public health type of work. They worked for different hospital systems. One of them worked in a public housing project. And I'm not sure the specifics of her project, but a lot of them focus a lot on like research and community outreach and like public health type of work out in the community. They learn a lot about the system and a lot of the issues in the system, that then informs the research they do here. They gain a lot of research experience and skills that they then bring to med school that I don't necessarily have. And it makes their ability to do research here much easier. Yeah.
If you were to do it over again, would you more seriously consider a gap year, or are you kind of happy you went straight through?
I would more seriously consider a gap year. I don't regret not taking it, because down the road you can. Like if I want to take a year in between my third and fourth year to do research or to get an MPH, I can do that. So it's not, the end. There's always time in the future, but I would much more strongly consider a gap year. I don't even think I considered it at all when I was an undergrad.
Mm, okay. I do want to encourage our students to submit questions. I don't think we have any questions yet, although I know they're out there. So I'm gonna keep chatting with my friend Natalie then. Natalie, let's talk about the MCAT. It's a test that's very daunting. It's intimidating. Students who aspire to become doctors look down the road at it, and some of them fear it or feel like they have to really prepare for it. Anyway, it's this big hurdle to becoming a doctor, and everyone has a different experience with it. So if you could kind of think back to when you were planning to take it, how you prepared for it, any insights you have on the MCAT.
Yes, so the MCAT for me was probably the time when I questioned whether I had what it took to become a doctor. I had not struggled like that academically in high school. And, in college, I remember Orgo, like studying for an Orgo test was super hard, and studying for physics, especially for me, was like very difficult. But I never, I was always able to study and go to office hours, and it would work out at the end. For the MCAT, I ended up taking it twice. And so I think that I didn't know, I kind of had to figure out how to study for the MCAT. So first things is it's a standardized test. And just because you are not good at taking a standardized test doesn't mean you're not going to be a good physician. Vice versa, there's people that are amazing at taking standardized tests and they're not the best physicians. And everyone knows this, all doctors know this, all admission programs know this. It's just something that we have to do. And so I remember the first time that I took the MCAT, I focused more on content. I joined a program that really was good at reviewing content. And so a lot of people that succeeded in that program were people that maybe had forgotten a lot of like content. For me, so I did that, and the first time I took the MCAT, I did not score anywhere near what I wanted to score. I don't remember my exact score, but I remember thinking I could probably not even get into med school in the United States with that score. Probably the first time I like cried because of like something related to this crisis that I was not going to be a doctor. And what am I going to do with my life now? And you kind of go through the emotions of it, probably vented to Chris multiple times, and then you just have to look for other resources. So everyone learns differently. My first attempt, I did not study the way that I should have studied, or addressed the specific needs that I had. So I was pretty strong on content. I needed more to focus on test taking strategies and actual practice problems and stuff. And so just asking around and doing a search, ended up finding a different approach to setting that was more tailored to the needs that I had. And I took the MCAT a second time. No one wants to take it twice, but I did. And the second time around, and it was actually difficult because for the second time I was studying as I was like going through the semester. And so it took a little bit more balancing of work and studying for the MCAT, but I decided to take it again. And whatever score I was going to get the second time was going to be the score that I was applying with. I do specifically remember I didn't even have my score in time for applications. So I applied kind of almost blindly. Not really. I was basing it on my practice test scores, but really trusting that second MCAT score and giving it a second shot. But it was probably the most challenging experience I had academically prior to med school. Was definitely the MCAT. I don't like MCAT.
I appreciate you sharing that. I think it's important for our students to hear, obstacles exist in a variety of ways for pretty much everybody. So I'm happy to say we do have some questions. So we're going to invite Brittany into the room. Brittany, come on in and go ahead and turn your camera on. Go ahead and introduce yourself to Natalie and ask your question.
Hello, how are you? Hello, how are you? I'm Brittany. I'm a freshman here at UM, And I think my question mostly is about extracurricular activities. And I want to be involved in a lot of things like research, community service, volunteering, shadowing, maybe even as a medical scribe, if that's possible for undergrads. And I was wondering, like you mentioned a lot about how, you were involved with Nicholas Children's Hospital, Miller, and I was wondering how you got those opportunities? Like how did you contact them? I was wondering that process. Like I'm just not really sure how to.
Yeah. So a lot. Yeah. So nice to meet you, Brittany. I would say VM itself has a lot of resources. And so one is the Butler Center. So the Butler Center knows pretty much all the community service opportunities, both on campus and off campus. So I remember that I initially visited the Butler Center. They pretty much ask you what your interests are, what you're looking for, and then guide you kind of accordingly. So that's one on-campus resource. The Miller School of Medicine has a lot going on at all times. And honestly, a lot of it for me was you can always Google search, research at Miller, and all their researchers, like all of this is online. A lot of it also was speaking to my advisors, like my biochemistry advisors. And then I also spoke to Dr. Gaines a lot. So I remember I went to visit Dr. Gaines after every semester. He was the pre-health advisor. I'm not sure if he probably still is the pre-health advisor, but Chris can correct me if I'm wrong. But I would visit with the pre-health advisor after every semester. Maybe that's a little excessive. You don't have to go every semester, maybe once a year, but pretty much I would tell him my interests, what I was up to, what I was doing, and he would advise me as to how I could improve. He himself has a lot of connections, especially at the Miller School of Medicine. So if you tell him your research interest, he can help guide you as well. And I think that the pre-health advising office also has an online like form that you can complete with your research interest, and they can find like a research mentor for you as well. So I would start off by what's available like on campus, like the Butler Center for Community Service, the pre-health office for like research. And then, if you still want like to search more, a simple like Google search, the Miller School of Medicine has like everything. Sit in cancer research, you can just Google like Miller School of Medicine cancer research, and they will have a page that comes up and it has all their researchers. And you have the beauty of having a email. And so you can just search for the researcher's name on your email, and you can probably send them an email and tell them, you're a student interested in their work. And a lot of them are very open to students helping them out. So I wouldn't be afraid to reach out to faculty, even if they're at the Miller School of Medicine and they're doing work that you find interesting. They like hearing that their students interested in their work.
Thank you. And I have a question about like, the organizations that you joined on campus. Like, did you join any like pre-health fraternities, for example? Or because I know that there are a couple on campus, and I was wondering if you were a part of that or something else maybe that helped you.
Yeah, so there are a lot of pre-med groups and fraternities on campus. I did join them when I was a freshman, and I think it is a good opportunity because they also have a lot of resources. So it's just like another resource that you can have. They bring in physicians to every single meeting, and these are physicians that are actively conducting research, and so it's a connection that you can make. They also do send out, remember they would always send out like shadowing lists, or if you were interested in shadowing, they could connect you with shadowing opportunities. So I'd say that's a major benefit to joining those like pre-med organizations. They really do connect you with local physicians that you can potentially shadow. So yeah, that's what I would say about those.
I hope you don't mind if I ask another question. But so, a lot of like, especially the STEM courses, they can be very challenging. And so let's say that if office out, like, how did you study for those classes? And let's say that, and when you do like come across like some obstacles, or like you don't understand a subject, you don't feel like very confident in it, you're not, something that you're doing isn't working well. Aside from office hours, like how did you attack that? Because I know GPA is a very big
Yeah. So I want to start off. Yeah. So these are difficult subjects for everyone, even in med school. So when we first came in, we all take basic science classes and we all struggled. So you're not alone, I guess is how I want to start. Everyone finds them challenging. Even now you ask like physicians here in the hospital and they don't remember any of these things. So for me, I was big on going to lecture, asking the professor questions. I was never afraid to go up to them. And again, it goes back to the small class size. I felt comfortable doing that. But I didn't understand something, I would go up to the professor after the class and ask them to clarify it for me. I did go to office hours. And when I went to office hours, I remember I would always, I'd say it was like Orgo. Orgo for me was a lot of just practice, practice, practice. And again, it goes back to finding your study strategy. And what worked for me may not work for somebody else, but I would practice and do all the practice problems. And then the specific ones that I just could not understand, I remember I would go the next day and I would go and ask the professor specific question regarding that. I would YouTube videos as well. I remember several times they have tutoring services at UM. I remember going to tutoring certain periods of time, which I had never done in high school or anything like that. I never really needed a tutor, but there were times where I would seek the tutoring services that UM offers. Those are offered by, it was actually a peer tutor. So there were also students that provided the tutoring. And again, I would always just go in with like very specific questions. I think when you go in with like and you say, I don't understand a very broad topic, it's hard for whoever's providing the tutoring or even for the instructor to kind of help you. But for me, it was always like, I would do the practice problems and then I had very specific, I would go to office hours for, and they would answer, or I would go to tutoring and they would answer. For me personally, like reading textbooks, I don't learn by reading. So I'm more of like a visual learner. So YouTube videos, going to lecture, all of those kind of researches are things that I utilized.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brittany, for those questions.
Of course, thank you.
Those were great questions, Brittany. We appreciate it. Next, we're going to bring in Dylan. And after Dylan, we have Chanel with a couple of questions. So Dylan, come on in. And when you come in, go ahead and turn your camera on, introduce yourself, and go ahead with your question.
Hi, Ms. Marrero. How are you? My name's Dylan, and I'm a freshman here at UM.
Hi, Dylan. I'm good.
My question for you is there ever a time, was there ever a time during your undergraduate years where you felt like you couldn't make it to where you are today?
The MCAT. Definitely the MCAT. When my first score, low, like average, for the exact score, maybe below, like it wasn't even going to get me into, it was just not going to get me into med school. At least I felt at the time I was already like junior. So I was pretty far into the process, which just made it worse because I felt like I couldn't really change. And I knew this was what I wanted to do. There was really nothing else that I wanted to do, but I felt like I was not going to get accepted with that score. So all these dreams I had in my mind just kind of like crashed down. And I felt like I was like in a little midlife crisis. But it really came down to yourself to like go through the emotions. I think there's nothing wrong with feeling like, oh my God, maybe, I think we all at a certain point feel like we're not capable enough to do something, but then kind of hopping right back onto it and seeing, where did I go wrong? What other resources are available? And how can I approach this again differently?
Well, that's all for me for now. Thank you. Thank you so much for your answer.
Of course.
Natalie, I just want to share, I think it's so important that you mentioned office hours. It's something folks like Jordan and I talk about every day with students, especially newer students, first years in particular. And there's always there always the sense that there's a barrier there. Like students look at us, so they look at me anyway, like, are you sure I should be going and talking to professors about how I'm struggling? And then usually once they do it, they realize how helpful it is in most cases. And so I'm happy to hear you emphasize that. And also tutoring. Natalie, I don't know if you ever got less than an A on an exam. And it's interesting that you're a student who also went and got tutored. So, here's someone who's accustomed to getting A's and has had a good record of that, and yet still wanted to make sure they got all the help that they could. So I think that's important for students to hear. Okay, next up we have Chanel. Chanel, if you can come on into the room and turn your camera on, introduce yourself and ask your question. Please also keep in mind that there is a delay with Natalie's connection. So if there's a pause, she'll probably jump in and so just try to go ahead and ask your question and Natalie will respond. Hi, Chanel.
Hi, I'm Chanel. I'm a freshman, and I have 2 questions for you. So my first one is, what did you write about for your personal statement, and how difficult was that aspect of the process for you?
So my personal statement was a narrative. It mixed everything that I had done. So I remember I first came up with a thesis and pretty much a one sentence that answered why I want to go to medical school. And then I created a narrative of the experiences that I had that allowed me to uncover those reasons. So in a nutshell, my thesis was, I want to go to medical school because medicine is the only career that allows me to practice advocacy, service, and science. And so I had kind of one paragraph that focused on a short narrative on a moment in my research that really showed me that I love kind of science. Another paragraph focused on a particular experience as a mental health peer educator that really taught me that I love advocacy. Another paragraph focused on some of the work that I did out in as an HIV counselor and had to do with like service. So it was a narrative. I would say come up with one sentence thesis that answers the question, why do I want to go to medical school? And then really try to create like a narrative of experiences that you've had that have pretty much led to that reasoning. Because I specifically remember in a lot of interviews, the person that was interviewing me mentioned a specific experience that I had. So I started off my personal statement with one night in the hospital. I was a radio lollipop volunteer, and I was dressed in a onesie. And many interviewers asked me about this one time where I was dressed in a onesie as a radio lollipop volunteer. So it's about creating a narrative that will make you stand out, and that the interviewer will say, I want to meet this person and speak to them.
Okay, and then also, what made you decide to become a preventive cardiologist?
What was that? I didn't get the last part of the question.
What made you want to become a preventive cardiologist?
So that is the big question. And when you get to med school, you will see that everyone kind of switches around and you kind of discover what you want to do. I love cardiology. I love the science of cardiology. I've always loved fitness and healthy lifestyle. And so they kind of blend together very nicely. I like pediatrics a lot. I'm very interested in health disparities and like obesity and weight management and physical activity. And so that's kind of blend together, managing hypertension, diabetes, a lot of these illnesses that patients have. But you'll learn, as you go through med school, particularly when you go to the second half of med school where you're in the hospital and you get to experience all the different patients and what different careers, there's a lot you can do and you kind of see what you like and what you don't like.
And then also for my last question, what activities did you partake in that increased your interest in health disparities?
In med school or in undergrad or in both?
In undergrad?
So I would say number one is when I worked with the HIV clinic at the Miller School of Medicine. I think was my first exposure. We worked a lot with adolescents that were underserved, and were able to see a lot of the obstacles that they face in trying to obtain care. And that was my first exposure to it. And then it just kind of further grew in med school, to be honest.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you, Shanil. We do have a question from Rodney, who's unable to come in and ask himself. So I will relay that question to you, Natalie. The question is, do you think that having a preference for research over shadowing may interfere with chances in medical school?
I would say no. I don't think there's like a magic number or magic proportion of how much research you need, how much shadowing you need, how much service you need. When medical schools or at least admission committees are looking at their applicants, they really want a balance. And so they want certain students that are like, they just love community service and they have crazy amount of community service hours. Maybe they're not as passionate about research. And then they also need students that are very passionate about research, and maybe have less community service hours. You really can't do it everything. You can't have crazy amount of community service hours and amazing, dedicate an extensive period of time to research as well. So I think that's where really asking yourself, what are you passionate about? What do you enjoy going to? Do you dread going to community service? Do you love every time you have to go into the lab for research? And yes, you have to kind of check mark every kind of extracurricular that you need for a med school application, but that doesn't mean that you need to dedicate X amount of time to each one. I think that that's where your passions come out. And if you love research, stick to that. Get the shadowing done, because you need to literally, it's kind of like a check mark, unfortunately, that you need in an application. But they're going to love the fact that you can speak about your research. I don't think any interview asked me, what did you learn when you were shadowing? They all recognize that shadowing is something that needs to get done, but it's a very passive way of learning. Definitely, if you love your research, that's going to stick out in your interviews, in your application, and I would dedicate time to that more so than shadowing. But yes, make sure that you get the shadowing done.
Great, I think that's a great answer. I hope Rodney was able to hear that. If not, I will relay that information to him. We do have one more question. So Amaya, if we could bring Amaya into the room, and I just want to share with the group that I did drop the survey link in the chat. So if you wouldn't mind clicking that and giving us some feedback here. We will have room for one more question if there is any other questions out there. And if not, we will close with Amaya. So Amaya, go ahead and introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Amaya. I just kind of wanted to ask about your experience with choosing a specific medical school and kind of how you ended up with Johns Hopkins and what you liked about it and stuff. So yeah.
So that's a tough question. Okay. When you get accepted into medical school, they then invite you for what they call a second look weekend, where now, in essence, they're just trying to recruit you. So they kind of tell you more about their program. And I think that you as an individual have to identify what you want in your medical school experience. Some schools are more research heavy. Some schools are more community service oriented or have a specific focus on public health. And that is largely also informed by the community that they serve. And so when I came to Baltimore, their curriculum is called, this is a lot of information, but we're called Genes to Society. So in essence, they really incorporated a lot of social determinants of health into our teaching. Baltimore is a very underserved community. So it aligned with a lot of the things that I wanted to do, and that brought me to medical school. And then in addition, I think it's super important who your classmates are and feeling comfortable with your classmates. And that's why second look weekend is very helpful when you get into med school, because you see who your potential classmates are going to be. My classmates were very diverse, as I mentioned. They came from everywhere in the country, and I really enjoyed that compared to other institutions that I went to where I didn't see that diversity. I wanted that. had it for me. I'm raised in a very diverse community, and so that was just something that's very important for me. At the end of the day, you're going to be a physician. It doesn't really matter where you go, to be honest. You're going to care about your patients. You're going to learn the material. You're going to go to the hospital. You're going to practice good medicine. So it's really about, what do you want to do? What are your interests? And finding a school that will offer you the opportunities to pursue those interests, grow those interests. And for your classmates, do you feel comfortable with those classmates? Do you like their curriculum? So you really get to then just see which program fits best for you at that point.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you for your question, Amaya. Thank you to everyone who attended and joined us for this conversation. Thanks to Jordan for running things behind the scenes. And most of all, thank you to you, Natalie. I appreciate you coming back and chatting with me. It's nice to see you again. Yeah, it's really good. I'm very proud of you. I'm so happy that things are working out the way they are. You're going to be an amazing doctor, and I hope you'll stay in touch with our programs. Can we throw up the U for old time's sake?
Yes, we can.